of our first panel discussion, Interweaving Information Realms, Leveraging the Big Data Opportunity.
To channelize and moderate the discussion, we have with us as the chairperson, Mr. Gaurav Dua, Director and Practice Lead, TMT Practice, CRISIL. I request Sir to take his seat on the stage. Sir has handled diverse assignments across verticals related to competitive intelligence, strategy planning, market entry strategy, amongst others. Prior to joining CRISIL, Sir was working with Frost & Sullivan. Prior to that, he worked as business analyst with HCL Infosystems and Headstrong, a US-based IT consulting firm focusing on the TMT sector. Sir has published over 35 articles in leading publications such as the New York Times, CIO Asia, the Economic Times, and Financial Express. Sir is a management graduate with dual specialization in marketing and IT and a bachelor's degree in management science. Sir, SITM welcomes you to Communicate Well.
Our next esteemed panelist is Mr. A. Balakrishnan, Vice President, BFSI, West and East Regions, EMC. Sir has been with EMC for 4 years, and his prior experience includes stints with Sun Microsystems in India and Singapore and IBM Global Services in India. Sir was also the country head for India and SAARC region for Packeteer Inc., which was later acquired by Blue Coat Systems US. He has almost 20 years of experience in the IT industry. In his current position at EMC, Sir's responsibilities include looking into all of EMC's products and solutions portfolio, including big data through EMC's acquisition of Greenplum. Sir, SITM welcomes you to Communicate 12.
Our next distinguished panelist is Mr. Anirban Dey, Vice President, In-Memory Platform Technologies, SAP Labs, India. At SAP Labs, Sir is responsible for research, development, and quality assurance for the flagship product in the in-memory space, SAP HANA. Prior to joining SAP, Sir spent 10 years with Oracle, based out of their headquarters in California, USA. Mr. Dey obtained his BTech degree from Indian Institute of Technology, Kharagpur. He then went on to complete his master's in engineering from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, USA, and MBA in finance from University of California, Berkeley, USA. We welcome you, sir, to SITM.
Next, we would like to call upon the panel Dr. Sanjay Kagwade, Practice Head, Telecom, Teradata, India. Sir has 20 years of professional experience, including over 14 years into business consulting in the global telecommunications arena. He has been involved in managing strategic planning and analysis in business analytics and intelligence, along with data warehousing for telecom service providers in the APAC region. Sir has also been involved in driving new initiatives such as big data analytics for enhanced revenue growth through better customer experience management in the telecom domain. Dr. Kagwade has worked with Tata Teleservices, TechM, Boeing Corporation USA, and the State University of New York, Stony Brook, USA in various capacities. Sir holds a doctorate in engineering from the State University of New York, USA. Sir, SITM welcomes you to Communicate 12.
We would now like to call upon Mr. Sachin Abrol, National Head Telecom SAS. Sir is currently managing telecom, media, and hospitality business for SAS in India and Sri Lanka. Prior to this, he was in Tata Teleservices, wherein he was a national product manager for their postpaid business. Sir has previously been with Tech Mahindra working on British Telecom broadband project. He has done his MBA from KJ Somaya Institute of Management Studies, Mumbai. Sir, SITM welcomes you to Communicate 12.
Our next distinguished panelist is Mr. Nishchal Khorana, Head Consulting, ICT, Frost & Sullivan. Sir has over 8 years of consulting expertise across the ICT space. Mr. Khorana has played a key role in consulting technology companies across areas of growth strategies, market advisory, and business planning and strategy implementation. Having worked on several international assignments in APAC and Middle East with technology companies providing domain-specific solutions, he has a deep knowledge of end-user verticals and business dynamics. Sir works closely with industry bodies like NASSCOM and CII. Sir, we welcome you to SITM.
I now have the honor of calling on stage Mr. Sachin Rasan, Senior Manager, Deloitte, India. Sir has over 10 years of experience in IT risk consulting, system controls design reviews, and vulnerability management. Sir has worked with several large multinational clients in North America and India. At Deloitte, Sir's responsibilities include facilitating in-house and client training programs for Deloitte on various technology risk areas in the telecom and technology space. Mr. Rasam is a chartered accountant, certified internal auditor, and certified information systems auditor. Sir, we welcome you to Communicate Well. I would now request our chairperson, Mr. Gaurav Dua, to kindly initiate the discussion.
Good afternoon, everyone. Distinguished panelist, Professor Sunil Patil, thank you very much for inviting us over to the campus. It's always great to visit such a beautiful campus, and I've been here a couple of times, and it's always a great feeling. We all know this is a session post-lunch, so we want to make sure that this is as interactive as it can be. The topic is very interesting. As all of you know, everybody today is talking about big data. So it's the next big thing after cloud computing. So I'm sure there is anyways a lot of enthusiasm out there in the market related to what this topic is all about. But having said that, there is an excitement, but there is a confusion as well. So in fact, very recently, we did a study, CRISIL did a very comprehensive study related to this space, big data market globally, and what are the kind of trends and what are the kind of issues that we are facing in this industry along with NASSCOM. And one of the biggest things that we realized while talking to the players in the industry who obviously were very clear how they want to go forward in this particular space, I think there was a lot of confusion in regards to the end customers, the actual users of the big data services, analytics, and so on and so forth. And the confusion lies not just in the definition in itself, but in the concept itself. So what is big data? What is big data analytics? Where do these two marry? And those type of things, So I think one of the objectives of today's session would be to demystify this mystery, talking about what big data is all about, what big data analytics is all about. I think that is the most critical thing. I'll just spend a minute just, talking about what we believe big data stands for and what big data analytics stands for. And then I'll also request the distinguished panelists to share their perspective also related to this space. So, when we talk about big data, typically, the sense that comes to our mind is big data means large volume of data, which actually is not the case. Volume is just one part of the story, right? So when you talk about big data, you're talking about 3 V's, as we call, So one is the volume, as we all talked about. The second is the velocity. So it's not just about the volume of data, it is also the velocity, which means that how quickly and how rapidly this data is getting generated today. I think that is the most critical thing. So it's volume, it's velocity, and it's variety. When we say variety, today you know that data is no longer residing in the traditional mode of storage systems that we used to talk about. Today we are looking at multiple sources from which this data is getting generated, be it the social media websites, right, from the Twitters and the Facebooks of the world, to the video links, to the audio links, to the webcasts that are happening, to even the emails, that we are sharing. Now the challenge is that so much of data is getting generated, but from a corporate perspective, from the business perspective, what is important to understand is out of that data which is sitting out today, what is the relevance of that data, right? A lot of data may be of no use for the corporates today. How you really need to derive meaningful insights, and more so the actionable insights, right? Everybody talks about analytics and all, but today the world is changing, wherein when we talk to the corporates, all they say is that, yeah, we have been using very comprehensive analytic techniques and all, but today you tell us that, what it means to my business. Can I use that to make some actionable, measures and decisions based on the data that you are talking about? So I think those are the kind of things that we are talking about. So in a nutshell, when we talk about big data, it's not just about, data, it's about the 3 V's that I talked about. What is big data analytics, right? So when you talk about big data analytics, again, it is nothing new. The only difference is, and in a very layman's language, of course, don't want to have too much of technicality out here. When you talk about big data analytics, it is nothing much more than advanced analytics applied on large data sets. That is a very, very simple definition of what big data analytics is all about. And I'm sure, as I said, that as we move forward from here, I'll request my panelists, distinguished members out here as well to share the perspective, and then we'll take it up from there. In terms of the format of this discussion, we want to keep it very interactive. We don't have any presentations. None of us would be making any presentations. So we'll definitely share our perspective, and towards the end of the session, we'll open it for any Q&A. So thank you very much, and looking forward to the interaction. So I'll start, Bala, if, you can share your perspective, specifically, the way you have seen this industry evolving. It's a very new concept, as we are talking about, but purely from an infrastructure perspective, purely from, the way the industry is right now, do you think the companies are ready in order to embark on this journey, or do you see that it's going to be a couple of years before companies are ready to adopt these things?
Thanks for the question, Gaurav. So first of all, before I start answering, I think it's a fantastic hospitality from all of you. I think in the IT industry, we are not used to so much of pampering. So you can give yourself a pat on the back. So I think from a context of, how enterprise data center, infrastructure has to be ready for this big data phenomenon. The usual traditional silos which have helped business intelligence, come out of enterprises, they need to undergo a big change. And if I just look at the traditional pillars of how enterprise data centers are built or IT organizations are built, it's still the same old people, process, and technologies, right? So if I look at the people part, gone are the days when you'll just have a database administrator who will be giving you, realms of data and the usual MIS reporting stuff. So the role, and if that interests you as students out here, is that of a data scientist. A data scientist is someone who comes in with a statistical background and also probably has a degree in computer science. What they are able to do is to put together predictive and prescriptive models which will help customers go to the specific domains. Like in telecom, you'll have churn management, customer retention, network analysis. So to do all of that, you need to have the background of statistics as well as a background in computer sciences. Now that's something which I do not think, there's a big shortage of that in the industry worldwide today. So if you probably go to Google and do a search for data scientist and the salary they draw, you'll come up to more than $100,000 for a startup position. So that's the impact of that role. And that's what Facebook is doing today. That's what Google is doing today, right? They're analyzing where you're going, which are the websites you're visiting. And that's the background of that role. So you have to cull all that data and come up with something much more meaningful. So from a people perspective, as cloud merges with big data, you'll have a lot of roles in the cloud part also. So, the cloud architecture specialists, the cloud advisory specialist. So as they help organizations move from physical infrastructure onto a virtualized infrastructure, onto a cloud infrastructure. So I've spoken about the cloud architecture roles, I've spoken about the data scientists. Very important to all of this is how much of your IT infrastructure can you virtualize? Because with the amount of data, I think 650% growth in the next 6 years, right? That's what we started with. Are you going to have so much of space in the data center? Are you going to provide for so much of storage? very clearly that's not going to happen. So it's extremely important that how do we manage all this data and how do we get about going there. So if you have legacy systems, if you have legacy x86 systems, is your big data piece going to merge and integrate well with that? Can you use that in the best possible sense so that you reduce your overall TCO in that sense? So these are factors which are going to matter as far as your legacy infrastructures and how you take it forward in terms of the data center is concerned. Most importantly is if you do go to the cloud, and if it happens to be a public cloud, how are you going to put the security piece around it? So these are the specific areas which the technology part clearly will have to address in that sense. So as organizations primarily today move from a reactive phase, which is having the data, not knowing what to do with it, to a descriptive phase, which is, yes, I have the data, I know the root cause of what exactly has happened, and therefore I improve upon it. Moving on to something which is more predictive, which is what our friends will explain on the stage, and then on to the prescriptive stuff. So at EMC, we've invested in a lot of technologies which make sense. So we have VMware, which I think all of you would know is the leader in virtualization, and cloud is the way to go as far as managing the big data piece is concerned as much as possible. We have RSA, which talks about the security in the cloud piece, and to have scale-out architectures. As of now, most of the legacy infrastructure from a hardware perspective has always been scale up. You need scale-out architectures to really cater to this amount of data, and therefore we have specialized storage infrastructure available which will manage all these pieces of data. So that's how we address all the three pieces.
Thanks, Bala. Sanjay, just want to get your perspective. Of course, you have been dealing with a lot of clients globally. Based on your experience working with these clients globally, first of all, what are the kind of challenges that you are seeing, in practical terms? Of course, we are talking about big data, and it's the in thing after cloud, as we talked about. But in reality, in practical sense, are you seeing genuine interest from the clients, number one? Second, in terms of the ROI, like we are talking about tough market conditions right now, every single penny that you spend, you need to see how it's adding to your top line and the bottom line. Now, from that perspective, when you go and discuss the same with your clients, is that question coming up in terms of the ROI? If yes, what is the kind of typical cycle we are looking? If you can share your perspective on these two things.
On the onset, let me thank Symbiosis for this wonderful opportunity to be here on the stage. I concur with Balkrishna that, great hospitality, and sure that's a great incentive to come back. Now coming to the question that you said, I'll take the last one before, because the ROI story is something that all telecoms are really putting that on the table right up front before they start any new initiative, be it big data or just enhancing their infrastructure needs out over there. So primarily we see that big data is a buzzword. They want us to come in and develop a business case. The onus is now on the consultant to build a business case wherein you can sell the idea of big data. The ROI has two facets to it, primarily the technology part. I think Balkrishna did mention about it. The kind of infrastructure growth is humongous. These kinds of spends really are not built into the CapEx. They got to go back to the management for enhanced budgets. And in these bleak times, it becomes more difficult. So by and large, the consultant then falls back on trying to capture the low-hanging fruits with incremental efforts showing a significant growth. In telecom today, the buzzword across all operators, barring a top 5 in the world, they're all looking at, okay, give me some small exercise that shows big data can enhance customer experience. Can you couple that with my network data that I have? See, most of the new, or rather all telecom companies today are in the business of data. They start capturing a lot of DPI-based information. That's deep packet investigation, if you guys are aware of it. There's a lot of analytics that can be done on that to know the network quality of service, which effectively would determine how good your network and content is provided or seen by your end customer. So these small nuggets are what people in this part of the world, especially Asia and Australia, looking at to say, okay, can you build a case up here? If there is value in it, then they start a small consulting exercise. But the Americas are a little more advanced. I think there's a little more money out over there. They're a little more adventurous, if I could use the word. So there's a little better uptake of these newer initiatives out over there. I think one of the key things out in the West, why it has actually kicked off is big data really started with the Googles of the world. There's a very seminal paper that the McKinsey's had put out last year on big data. And Google started off with writing the set of algorithms, and MapReduce was one of their artifacts. That led to the kickoff into this big data space. So the likes of AT&T and Verizon took on from there, and that's where there's a much better uptake of big data as a philosophy. And by and large, everyone are looking at enhancing customer experience and the revenue uptake from there. So they are smaller. I think there are very small steps in this direction. I personally believe give it another 24 to 36 months before the technology side of the pie also settles down. What is offered? Multiple technology vendors have various offerings, different pricing strategies, plus the expectation from business. The data usage pattern across customers are changing all around. So just to grapple with how data usage changes over a period of time across demographics is challenging and humongous. Today, there are over 70 installations globally that store over a petabyte of data. And it's mind-boggling. It's more than a data farm. So I think I'll leave it at that. Great opportunities, having said that these challenges are out over there. I'll give you one insight. Volvo, in its new cars that are rolled out in Europe, we are talking about M2M, on their onboard computers, constantly beams sensor information down to their centralized workshop. Every day, they collect 3 terabytes of data. What are you going to do? But they have a program wherein they analyze this data. If they realize a problem in the data, they call up the owner, and ask the car to come into the garage. And this 3 terabytes of data uses the big data paradigm, analyzes that overnight in a batch window of 12 hours. So there are people who are doing it, push the envelope, results are there. And they have a great customer loyalty program. I hope I shed some light onto that question.
No, thanks, Sanjay. Thanks for interesting insights. Sachin, want to get a little bit of perspective from you. I'm sure one of the pioneers in the analytics space and the kind of implementations that you have had globally. Just want to understand from your perspective, what are the kind of trends that you are seeing out there when you go and talk to your clients, number one. Secondly, which are the sectors, which are the verticals who, as per your assessment, are likely to be the early adopters, and if yes, what are the reasons why they are going in for these type of implementations? If you can share some perspective on these two things.
Okay, let me just briefly touch upon what this buzzword big data as per us is. Big data, interesting, a lot of people talk about, but we need to understand is that there's a lot of information overload which happens with big data. You able to understand what is the relevant data out of the big data which our organization needs and from where the ROI can be extracted. One factor which everybody would agree is this time dimension which has come into picture. How faster you can make your decision, that is what is determining the whole big data analytics. Let me tell you from a telecom perspective, there are areas like Sanjay mentioned, customer experience management, big area. A lot of global telcos are talking about how do you merge network data with the customer data and try to get the perspective which is 360-degree view about the customer. Meaning which lot of location-based analytics, lot of things about which tower he's latching onto, which particular social media activities our customer is doing at a particular point of time. There are a lot of analysis happening, and we've been working with a couple of Western telcos in this regard. Just to probably back home, back to Asia, give you a perspective on that. We work with the largest Japanese telco, and what we could help them to do is that the whole of social media and sentiment analytics or text analytics. What interestingly they came, they could do is they could actually analyze the customer behavior to understand who are those customers who are gonna buy, say, a Lady Gaga a song through mobile, say when they latch onto their network next. Now, what essentially the end exercise is how much kind of ROI they could get out of it. Similarly, for a US telco, what we could do is the whole customer experience management piece. We could help them analyze the 15 petabyte data. Obviously, the infrastructure was the likes of, say, Terata or EMC or whatever. But then on top of it, there's a layer of analytics which help to make the decision faster. That's the whole perspective. The time dimension is really, really critical here. All this, whatever is happening from a big data perspective, it was happening earlier also. Now the organization is looking at when customer is calling back, to the call center, am I capable of throwing an offer then and there on? And that's more important. And coming to your last question, which is which sectors are adopting, as per us, it's a banking, financial services, and telecom. These are the big spender of big data initiative globally, and this is going to be leading the trend. Yeah.
Thanks, Sachin. Andy, my next set of questions for you. Just trying to understand from a processing perspective, because we are really talking about large volume of data. At the same time, we need to have really cutting edge technologies, and we are talking about some open source platforms coming out in the market, be it Hadoops of the world, and so on and so forth. Now, purely from a processing perspective, what are the kind of things that companies need to do today? As in, are we ready, first of all? If not, then what are the kind of applications? What are the kind of, right from a technology stack, if we are looking at? Can you share some perspective from that perspective?
Sure. First of all, apart from the great hospitality, I must say you guys have a beautiful campus. I'm still feeling like going outside, taking a walk, even though it's raining at times. So coming back to your question, Gaurav, I think from a technology perspective, if you look back into the history, traditionally when the whole technology started, the computers and then came in the web and all, we saw a very two-tiered kind of an approach, a database and an application, which is sitting on top of it. Then with the advent of internet, we saw the evolution of a three-tiered architecture, which is database, then a middleware, application server, and then, of course, the presentation layer. Now, look back into the last 30 to 40 years into the evolution of these technology pieces. We have seen dramatic innovations and renovations in the middle layer, the application layer, as well as in the end user layer. For example, today my kids and all are so used to using tablets. We are so used to using mobile phones. So even the UI technology has evolved so fast. The middleware technology has evolved so fast. Whereas if you look back down in that database layer, we are still residing in the technology of which is 40 years old, theories that has been invented, like the relational databases and the traditional databases. And yet, in our real lives, what we are seeing is that technology is no longer being able to cope up with what is happening in reality today. Because today, we are not just dealing with structured data, actually we are dealing with a lot of unstructured data. To give you a perspective, we all know that there are hundreds and thousands of tweets that happens every day, probably millions of them. People write blogs, people write newsletters. Yesterday's biggest news was Apple launched iPhone 5. I, as a person, as an investor, maybe potentially interested in Apple, would like to know, should I buy Apple stocks now? Now, do I have the time to read all the blogs and the tweets and the news articles? No. But this is a classic example of unstructured data where if some system can help process that, and give me a summary. For example, what's the overall sentiment about Apple because of the iPhone 5? What are the trending topics that are happening in the context of the company, Apple? I want to see things like Samsung coming up, things like some other stuff coming up. But it helps me make a mental map. But I don't have the time to read all of it. And that's a classical example where you will see such kind of computational powers which are beyond just traditional database, structured data processing that is becoming a reality of today. The challenges are enormous. If you look at big data, you can really break it up into 4 different steps in a very simplified way. We have to acquire the data, we have to store the data, we have to process the data, and then we have to present the data. Me personally, I'm very much focused on the processing aspects of it, but I'm sure even within our panel itself, we have people who are invested into the storage of the data, presentation of the data, and all. Overall, it's a big challenge. It's a big hype, it's a big challenge, but just like the example I gave you, should you invest in Apple today because of iPhone 5? That's a big data problem, and that's reality.
Thanks, Andy. Nishtal, just want to get some flavor from you, and this is more from an IT perspective. Now, when we are talking about big data, I think one of the key things that all of us out here and the industry is also realizing, it's not just about pure play analytics or research firms. It's not about the IT firms. It's not about when we say IT, we are talking about hardware, storage, we are talking about services, we are talking about consulting, project management, and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of players, a lot of segments that are likely to play in this end-to-end big data value chain. So it's not just about the analytics. A lot of big software, hardware, services players are likely to play a very significant role in this entire market space. Based on your understanding and your interactions, initial with specifically from an IT perspective, how do you see the Infosys and the Wipros and the IBMs of the world also catching up on this? Can you share some perspective purely from an IT perspective?
Sure, very interesting question. But let me throw that back in a way to the audience, right, to begin with. Everybody here, I think I need not say further that you have a beautiful campus and great hospitality, but now that you're caught in this room, listening to us, I just want to raise of hands of how many people really believe that there are too many technology topics happening too fast and we're probably finding it difficult to cope with. Perfect. Now put yourself in the shoes of somebody who is running an IT firm, okay? I mean, 5 years back, everybody came and told him, 10 years back, I'll say, probably everybody came and told him it's about digitization. Put your resources there, train your employees, move there. Suddenly, 7, 8 years back, everybody said it's about cloud computing, it's about SaaS. Then they said, no, build platforms. You've got to be an IP-based company. You have to move into a non-linear growth model, move into PaaS kind of solutions or build IP tools. Then they said, no, you've got to be part of IaaS because if you're not giving it the end-to-end piece, then you're missing out something. Build your data centers, tie up, have your alliances. You've got to be in the end-to-end services. So everybody said, okay, that's important. Now, keeping that backdrop, it's important to understand what lies in for big data, right? And I think that's where I like to take a step back, right? Basics of marketing, we need not get into it. We need to understand what does an enterprise today really need, right? And that's where it's very interesting to note that all the enterprise today really needs from IT is real-time intelligence. Can my IT solutions provide me real-time intelligence, right? And all the solutions and technologies that we talk about are basically enabling the users to achieve this, right? So where does the big data concept really fit in, right? So we saw the emergence, we saw first of all large enterprises spending on enterprise technologies, ERP and the likes. Then we saw the emergence of SaaS, so we saw SMBs who could probably not afford these large ERP solutions probably being able to do so now and using this. Then they started investing in communication collaboration tools, and then we got the mobility. And of course, on the parallel, we had a lot of technologies like sensors coming in. What this resulted in is huge, humongous amount of data. Right? I don't use the word unstructured, I like to call it multi-structured. Right? So you have various forms of structured data there. Again, data is not what you need. You need the insights from the data to unlock the business value, right? And that's where the importance comes, that I have data, XYZ technology, I have a pool of data probably lying in silos, and I need to unlock my business value, right? And that's what this whole big data thing is about, right? And very interestingly, now when we look at it from that perspective, you'll realize there's an opportunity for each and every player in the ICT ecosystem to be a part of this and capture some pie. Some of us may actually build technologies to be able to do this. For example, storage devices, retrieval, software solutions with fast algorithms, probably sentiment analysis solutions on social media and the likes. And some of us may actually just use it as a marketing gimmick, right? We may call the conventional analytics as big data analytics and go to the market, right? But that's where the relevance comes in, and that's the perspective that probably I would like us to have, right? They keep in mind that what is it really doing? It's about analyzing this humongous amount of data to give us business insights. Now, to answer your question on what a player is doing, so you see on one hand you have the product companies, right, who are developing the hardware and the software, as we discussed by the previous panelists, which are coming in to actually help us gather the most out of this big data which is available. And on the other hand, you have the services players who, of course, are partnering well with the product companies to integrate this with their already existing landscape. And then you have the telcos. The telcos were anyway looking out for means to move out of the selling the pipe business and commoditization, etc., and they're looking into value-added services. And this is a great opportunity for them as well. So they are looking at ways that they can actually move into this big data space as a vast provider, look at M2M as a technology and see what they can provide to the end customer to help him achieve his business objectives. So to sum it up, basically there's an opportunity for across the ICT ecosystem to move in their own sphere, just extending to what they were already doing. It's not a radical shift from what they were doing. It's extending what they were doing to make the technology more suitable to access this kind of data and make it more usable.
Thanks, Nishil. Sachin, just one, based on your understanding and interactions with the clients that you deal with, typically what is coming out in the market? Is it more like, it's a hype, like cloud came in, yes, everybody just jumped onto the bandwagon, and now we are talking about big data? Or do you generally believe that there is a clear-cut, long-term strategy that companies are actually trying to devise? In fact, I know of a couple of Fortune 100 companies who have already talked about their big data strategy. So do you see this now overall coming in their strategic intent, or do you see it's more like someone is doing there, my competitor is doing, and I also need to do it? Is that what is happening, number one? Second, from a risk management perspective, when I say risk management perspective, there are a lot of regulations which are coming out in the market. Like if you look at Basel III regulation, Dodd-Frank regulations in the financial services sector, as a result of that, the disclosures that company needs to make out there in the market has increased tremendously, right? So there is a lot of social responsibility that today companies have. And unless they have really, really high-end analytical techniques to mine that data, they will not be in a position to cater to this real-time intelligence that they need to provide to the stock markets, to the regulators, to their customers. So from a risk management perspective as well, what is the kind of sense that and the feeling that you're getting while talking to the players? So if you can share your perspective on these two things, long-term strategy, is that happening? And secondly, the risk management.
First of all, let me thank everyone for this great hospitality out here. It's a beautiful campus out here. Coming to the question, I feel long-term strategy from a big data perspective. Look at telecom industry. The data already exists. We already have the big data. Now the question is, how do we channelize it or how do we optimize it? Now what happens is, even in a competition scenario, companies try to adopt to what X is doing or Y is doing, and we jump on the bandwagon. So what in this case happens is we look at short-term gains most of the times. For cases like big data, typically we need to have a long-term strategy in place, which actually turns out like 2 to 3 years as to what we want to target. What are the specific areas that we want to go into, and then look at the set of data and cull that data typically to understand as to what is typically useful to us, how that can be leveraged or disseminated, and what are the options available to that. So a long-term strategy is critical. Not only from this perspective, but also what kind of infrastructure is available. The infrastructure to support that kind of a strategy is extremely critical. So at times what happens, the idea is great, but the supporting infrastructure for that particular organization may actually not support that kind of an idea. The idea may work for X entity, but it may not be relevant for Y, because the infra is completely different. So that needs to be considered, because data is available. It's available out, it's available within the organization, it could be available outside. But what needs to be analyzed is to, will this work for me in the long term? Yes, it is a world which is real time today. But the set of parameters that you align, how you decode that, how you disseminate that particular information is very critical. So devising a long-term strategy on data management or big data is very critical. Another aspect of it is the risk management part, which was looked at. Now, any strategy that you devise, even if it's a short term or a long term, and it involves around data, first is the security part of it. Now, tons of data is available, tons of sensitive data is available, maybe the BFSI sector or could be the telecom sector. It is very critical as to how securely the data is accessible and how securely the data is disseminated. With cloud coming into the scenario, it is all the more critical that we have effective risk management procedures around it. With outsourcing in the picture, it becomes all the more complicated. Couple the cloud with outsourcing, it becomes all the more complicated. So it is very necessary that we look at the security protocols that we deploy as to how this data is handled, how the information generated out of data is been actually collated, circulated, so that it doesn't just go into the wrong. Now coming to the regulator part of it, typically, telecom is any which is highly regulated, lot talked about. Now TRAI has specific regulations as to how the security has to be done. So it is a highly regulated sector. We have tons of data available. Security, long-term strategy, and risk management are the three keywords which I would feel that any big data plan should actually look at as these three larger pillars of how to handle it. I believe. Thank you.
Thanks, Sachin. We'll just pause for a minute. Just want to see if there are some questions from the audience, and then if we have time, we can always take the discussion forward. But really want to hear you out. If you have any specific questions addressed to any panelist, please put the question, or otherwise any one of us can take it from there. Yeah, please give us. Yeah, please.
Good afternoon, panel. Myself, Abhijit Kunturkar. I am from second year Systems and Finance. My question is regarding what changes does an organization does in order to overcome the challenges of an big data, technical side, or you may say the human resource sides. Anything.
Okay. Anyone from the panel?
Okay, so I think I did speak a bit about that in my portion. So if you look at it today, if you go to are you referring to an IT organization or an organization in itself? Okay. So today, if you look at it, if you look at the typical infrastructure team, you'll have the network side of things, then you'll have the people with the application piece, then you'll have the people with the infrastructure piece, which is the hardware part of it. So as you move towards the cloud and big data, all of this will collapse. You will no longer have silos of people who are having specialist trainings in each of these and certifications in each of these. What you will have will be one layer of cloud and big data certified people, and they will be the ones who will manage this entire layer. Okay, because to manage all of this independently, the organization will just go mad. So you will have people who will manage this layer with the user, and at the back end, the cloud should automatically take care of the provisioning. The cloud should take care of the requirements of the infrastructure and the applications to serve up to the users. So there will be changes in technology, there will be changes in people, and there will be changes in the process part of it.
Let me just try to give you a very simplistic answer to this. The whole information management strategy has to change. Traditional way of doing whole IT roadmap is that you acquire the data, you store the data, and then you analyze the data. Big data coming in, you can't store all the data. You need to stream the data, you need to score the data to look at the relevance of the data, and then you store the data. Right? So there's a shift. There's a shift from, you first keep all the data and then you try to analyze it. Here you see that which of the data is important and then try to analyze it. Yeah?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point. I think organizationally speaking, rightly so, I think the role of IT that we are seeing right now, it's also getting a lot more decentralized. We are seeing that the LOBs, line of businesses, are getting much more in the focus. They are becoming the decision makers as to what kind of software and hardware they want to use. Business users are becoming much more tech savvy. Don't think that the business user doesn't know where this data is coming from. So I think these are the trends that you are seeing, where a lot of the traditional things that has been very much cornered within the world of the IT is now actually dispersing out all over the organization. And this is a significant shift, primarily because of the UI technologies, because of the back-end technologies, but it's happening as of right now. In short, it's just what we are calling as LOB empowerment that's happening.
Sanjay, you wanted to share something?
Yeah, I would like to add one more complexity to this whole game, and that is regulatory norms. Till today, hasn't been much of a movement towards regulating this huge volumes of data. We pretty much voice data centric, store it for 7 years. That's a kind of a norm out over there. What happens when you have the entire network data? Do you have to store that? Because network forms a huge part of the big data analytics. So these are newer facets which will come in, which will change the entire way how organizations work and how they look at data. I think people talk about a real-time availability of data, but that concept, that idea itself will undergo a change because it will be more of value-based. I mean, I think it's no point having a prepaid customer's last recharge of 5 rupees in near real time. I think I would like to hire my platinum customer who probably could not complete that call when he was driving between point A and B. How do I service him? So there is going to be a paradigm shift that, at least that's what I foresee. Big data would just be an instigator. That's the pebble in the ocean. Many, many aspects of this are undefined. And I think each line of business will have to form their own strategy. And the big brother will come in later to mess up the game.
Bala, you wanted to say
something?
So
just as an ending line, while cloud will transform your IT, big data will transform business. That's the subtle change between the two in that sense.
Thanks. Any other questions from the audience?
Yep. Good afternoon, panel. I'm Bhaumik Shah from second year Marketing and Finance. My question is that talking about big data, questions about intellectual property rights attached to the data are arising. So regarding that, what is your view regarding that? Who owns the data? Questions like who owns the data, and who owns a piece of data, and what defines the fair usage of a data? And there are other questions like liabilities, that who is responsible if inaccurate piece of data leads to negative consequences of the organization. So how are companies handling in this regard?
Sure. I'll probably start, and then I'll request other panelists also to share their perspective. So I think that's a very good question, and I think that definitely is a very important so to say factor when we talk to the clients across different geographies. So whenever we have worked with a lot of our clients, be it in US and Europe, I think that is the biggest concern about the data security, right? Because their data is moving out of their country. What is the surety that we are maintaining the integrity and all those type of things, right? Now, one is, of course, you have the NDAs and all those things in place. So just because big data has come in doesn't mean that, things related to your IP were not taken into consideration earlier. So be it your BPO sector, the ITES sector, the IT sector, all the companies in this sector have been adhering to very stringent norms in order to comply to these type of data privacy issues. So that has already been happening in the industry. It's not a new thing. It's just that it's going to get further, so to say, amplified as we move forward from here. That's one. The second thing what has happened is more from a technology perspective also, right? So once the data is moving from one place to the other, across borders, I think now we have really cutting-edge encryption technologies that you must be aware of, right? And you're not just talking about the first level and the second level encryption levels. So there are some really, really good encryption technologies that are available out there in the market, which companies are using in order to make sure that even when the data is transmitted, it is transmitted in a very secured manner. So that's another thing that we are seeing out there. Anything else, panel,
I think you pretty much answered the question. I'll just add one more to it. I think we'll get more ideas from the panel. There's something which has now newly started coming up. Operators are talking about content assurance. We only heard of revenue assurance and network assurance. Now content assurance has started coming up in this part of the world too. Significant operators in India as well as in Japan and Australia are saying, I don't own content, but I need to make my buck on it because you're using my pipe. So these are newer challenges that are coming up, newer contracts are signed off, business models are now taking shape. Though most of them are aping the West, but I think some have to be very centric to the geography where you're operating in. Yeah. So newer business models will drive these newer initiatives.
There is also a perspective about how this information is transmitted, like a lot of personal information relating to banking, even in telecom, as to personally, which is called as PIN, personally identifiable information. If you look at the North American markets or the European markets, there are very stringent laws as to how this information cannot be actually transmitted to across the shores. There are very specific laws which says personal information about name, sex, gender, income parameters, where he works, cannot be transmitted under any situation beyond the boundaries of the particular country. And the same things, once it's cloud-based typically, now that's where the security concerns start rising, as to where is the cloud based out of typically. What kind of challenges will they face? How is it secure? Is my data residing alongside somebody else's data? some others' data can be accessible by my data? Can it be interchanged typically? Can somebody actually just manipulate the data typically to use it to particular advantage? These are the typical challenges we'll go as we go on to the cloud and the outsourcing model for the big data also is what I feel.
Sure. No, I think, the panel answered that pretty well. But just to share one or two other perspectives as well. To our mind, I don't think so that's an issue now. If you would have asked this 10 years back, things were very different, right? The outsourcing industry, the very outsourcing industry that we are talking about out here has evolved quite a lot. And there are some very, very stringent steps that each and every company operating in this space is taking to ensure that the data security is maintained, So from that perspective, and there have been ample examples, I can quote, there are a couple of our clients who used to visit us, and they used to say the kind of security measures that you have put in place, it's actually not there even in our sites. That kind of comments we used to hear. You are working in a CCTV environment, you're working on their intranets, direct intranets, you're not linked to your own, so to say, internet or intranets within the company. You're directly sitting on their intranets and constant monitoring is happening. So, what I'm trying to say is there are umpteen measures have been taken in that direction. And to my mind, it's not going to be a big issue in terms of adoption of big data technologies.
Just one last comment. I think technology, is really keeping in pace with all these aspects. Sometimes it's a question of mindset. And if history teaches us, for example, when I first put my credit card to buy an internet transaction, I was scared. And because everybody was thinking, oh, my credit card information would be lost, something will happen. Today, do you even think twice putting your credit card on the internet? No, you don't. And that's it's just a mindset change. And if we change, the companies will also change. That's just a matter of time.
And the underlying message is even organizations are becoming very smart in terms of knowing that what data has to go out. Right, that's important. That has come with the experience, right? So that's important to know also.
Any other questions, please?
Yeah, good afternoon, panel. I'm Vijaya. I'm a faculty in telecom here. There's just one basic thing that I've been wondering about. We have had Steve Jobs, Google, and Facebook come up with great solutions or products or whatever you call them. And these have all come much before big data has come in, right? Steve Jobs understood what a typical user of a phone would need in a phone without having to analyze volumes and volumes of data. There are quite a few fantastic products which have come up without analyzing anything at all. So is there a basic emphasis on simplicity that is required, or have we complicated our things a lot and then now we are going to trying to simplify it down, processing too much? So, I don't know, maybe I'm being a bit cynical, but then this is what wonders me.
Sure. Any observations?
So they've solved simple problems to create a more complex world for us. So all of that generates more big data than anything else. All of whatever you mentioned.
And that
Apple, Google, and Facebook generates more big data than anything else.
And the big data story has actually been started by them, right? Because if Facebook was not there, social media was not there, right? To the extent. And if Apple was not there, applications were not there. And hence the data to that extent wasn't there.
So is big data more towards only understanding consumer behavior, or are there more applications to it?
So I think big data is pervasive. Why we are talking about social media today is because there is a feedback mechanism available, through Twitter, LinkedIn, or or Facebook, and therefore it is easier to capture content and it is easier to analyze it. So the tools and other things which are available for big data today, if you see which are the industries which are using it, it is probably telcos and retail, because these are the places where you will get most of the data from. But there are traditional manufacturing houses which are planning to use big data in a very different manner. How can we prevent accidents? Does the data from automation and control systems provide a trending towards an accident or towards something which is unnatural? can I know whether the quality of my stuff which is getting rolled out, can I link it to the data which is trending from the control systems? Now, that is not a traditional big data, use case in that sense. So that is where people are saying, can I apply it in HR, where the person next to me could be of the same caliber, and if I leave the organization, can he or she replace me? Whereas we go all around the world trying to replace that person. So analytics is, yes, important in the space where it is consumer, but a whole lot of it is beyond that also. So that explains the relevance in that sense.
Sanjay?
Can I just take off on that? NASA on one space flight, where the shuttle goes up and comes down, generates more than 25 terabytes of data. That probably kills all telcos, the kind of volume that they generate over 6 months. So big data is there. A nuclear plant, for example, Kudakulam, the one that's coming up, annually they'll be generating about 20 terabytes of data in just monitoring their systems. So big data is there. Why are we talking about it? Because someone somewhere in Google did it, they analyzed it, they got the mega bucks out of that. Companies like ours, whom we work for, joined the bandwagon. Let's commercialize the product. Let's sell this pipe dream. This is the capitalistic world. I'm taking the other cynical side of the story. So you have to move it. 25 years ago, RDBMS was there. That was big data. Who thought that you could have a terabyte of information on a pen drive? It's the way how we move. This is evolution. This is the evolution in data. Today you're having 75 odd companies who have stored petabytes of data. Today they have scales that say they'll be, in another 10 years, they'll be quadrazillion bytes or something. 10 to the power 32 bytes. Zettabytes, there you are. I mean, these things are mind-boggling. People want to put everything that you find in the US library, Congress library, onto a hardware. What are you going to do with it? I think there should be some sanity and rationalization of this entire exercise and pick up the golden nugget of what you're looking for. I think that's the essence of big data. Big data is a buzzword. We've been doing it, finding that golden nugget out of, it was not a few GB, it's now in TB and probably even in petabytes. So for that, it's heavy lifting. You need more horsepower. You got to think differently, so you need a data scientist. You need a guy who's driving his business. He needs a better ROI, so you need to facilitate that. So this entire drama is geared to that. And we are not going through good economic times.
I'll just add something interesting. We all heard about the 3 V's about big data. But I think data itself also has got a psychological angle to it. It's that sense of ownership. I'll give you an example. I have my home laptop and desktop. I back up, and the backup has its own backup, and its backup resides on the Amazon cloud. How many times do I really go back and look at my backup? Probably once or twice a year. When it's not immediately available in my laptop, I go back and start searching for it. But I still want my satisfaction that I have that data. I don't want to lose it forever. Maybe I never need it, but I still hold on to it. So that's that psychological nature of data hoarding that we have, and that's just human within us. And nowadays we are hearing about new innovative concepts like digital afterlife. So you have your Facebook accounts and blogs and all. God forbid, when you die, there are wills to say that, my content goes to XYZ person. So it's becoming the status of a wealth that you hoard and you pass on. So there's this psychological angle that we have to see, which is also fostering the growth of the problem that we are talking about, which is the big data.
I think we have run out of time, but just last comments from Nishil.
Sure, that's a reason why, just coming back to your point on consumer behavior and the examples that we're discussing. The success of big data will really lie on first understanding what do you want to draw out of this information. You have a data pool, what is it that you want to draw out of it? And that's why the way I look at big data is you have the statistical part, right? For sampling, not looking at the entire pieces of data, pulling out a sample. You have the analytical part, where you are using the right kind of solutions to analyze. But then over and above, so it's a creative part, right? So you have statistical, analytical, and creative, right? Where in that specific business concept, what is it that I will draw creatively out of this information, which is going to help me achieve my business objectives? right? And those are the companies which will really make success out of it. And the rest of it will probably spend money and do the gimmicks, and probably that will go down the drain.
Thanks. So I think, we have run out of time, but, we'll just quickly conclude the session. I'm more than happy to take any questions offline. So I think as it came out in today's discussions, our distinguished panelists, the feedback that we got from you guys as well, I think a couple of things are very clear. Big data is pervasive, I think, and it is here to stay. That's very, very clear. And it's, of course, you can say it's a buzzword, but there is a lot of reality behind that as well. And you would see some practical, examples of the same. Of course, there are implementations happening globally, but still we don't have so many implementations, that you can say, oh, this is a concept, that is likely to stray. But clearly, companies are actually, as I said, when we spoke to a lot of companies out there in US, out of the Fortune 100 companies, at least 90% of the companies have outlined their plans in terms of big data strategy, and they'll be coming out with that over the next 1 or 2 odd years. So that's one. The second thing is, in regards to the verticals, I think, what is coming out is 3 sectors: financial services, telecom, and retail. They are likely to be the ones who are likely to drive this market initially for the 1 or 2 years that we are talking about. And gradually you would see a lot of other sectors like aviation and some of the other sectors that we talked about, be it manufacturing and all, who are likely to, catch up on this particular aspect. Third thing is that big data is not about Hadoop. I think that's one thing. It's a myth. It's not just Hadoop. Typically that's the kind of sense that we typically get in the market. So hopefully with this session, at least you are clear, what big data is all about, what big data analytics is all about, right? And each and every player in this value chain, right, from the technology players to the, the BPO ITES companies to the analytics firm, have a role to play. So it's a very large opportunity that we are talking about. In terms of the market size, what we are looking at as per the research that, NASSCOM and CRISIL did just 3-4 days back, it got released. We are looking at, by end of this year, the global market size for big data to touch close to 8 billion. And this is likely to grow to 25 billion by 2015. In regards to the India opportunity, and I think as we discussed about that as well, it's not very mature, but still by end of 2012, we are expecting this market to touch close to 200 million odd, and by 2015, close to $1 billion odd. So that's the kind of opportunity. Of course, we hope that Indian companies have a larger share of the pie as we go forward. So that's another thing. Another thing that we want to just leave food for thought. When you talk about data, I think one thing we all need to understand is data today is not just about structured data. I think that's the most critical thing. So there are 3 levels of data, storage. You're talking about the structured data, which all of us know. It's stored in our hard drives, the servers, in the traditional form of storage. So that's one form of data. The second is the semi-structured data, wherein, the data is getting stored in, like the RSS, feeds that you're talking about, and so on and so forth. So that's the unstructured data. Last but not the least is the unstructured data, which basically, the social media websites, the weblogs, the audio, video files, the emails getting exchanged, and so on and so forth, So these are the 3 broad classifications of data. What is very interesting to note is today, as we talk, as of now, 80% of the data residing globally is in the unstructured format. So just imagine only 10% of the data is in the structured format, 10% in the semi-structured, and 80% of the data today is in the unstructured format. And clearly we know a lot of data may not be useful, but the data is there. Now that's the question mark in the mind of the corporates, what to do with such a large amount of unstructured data, right? So no matter what, you have to analyze, you have to figure out a way to solve this business problem. So that's it from our side. Thank you very much for all of your questions out here. It was pretty good to get your perspective. And as I said, all of us are more than happy to answer any questions offline. Thank you very much.
Of course, one of the things the carriers think would do it is M2M Internet of Things. Additionally, the number of consumers that you can sell SIM cards to is reducing. So in many markets, they're over 100% penetration. So once the if you like, the connecting people market has began to saturate, it makes sense to connect machines. So the second main point to focus on here is the economics. We've hosted 2 events in China so far. One was at the end of 2010. The other one was in April this year. And the one point I'd like to make on this slide is that everybody's talking about Ericsson's 50 billion connected devices. In China, they were talking about 700 billion connected objects. And I think once you start looking at sensors in just about everything, the carpet knows where I am, etc., this lectern is embedded, then it's very easy to see how you can come up with those kinds of numbers. So anyhow, so the second point is that the race is on to connect machines after we've connected people. The third thing, and I think this is really crucially important, is that we are genuinely talking about the creation of, if you like, new mousetraps, genuinely better mousetraps. And this happens to be a real concrete case. A company called Wireless, the customer was Rent-A-Kill. They make rat traps. They spread them around the countryside. They catch the rats so the rats don't eat the crops. Now, in the old days, you spread your rat traps around the countryside. You send out a man or a woman in a van to empty the traps every day, every other day, every whatever. Today, this technology is now so cheap, it makes sense to put it in the rat trap. You know when a rat has been caught, you know when the rat is dead because you can monitor CO2. And lo and behold, you don't need to send anybody out this week because for whatever reason, all the rats went that way and avoided your farm. So instead of talking about business process re-engineering, where we may be looking at moving around a couple of blocks of logistics, we are genuinely talking about transforming major industries with this technology. So that's the point I'd like to make here. So I think this has been mentioned already. If you look at Moore's law, price of chips and so on going down. But the point I'd like to stress on this side is that something in the creativity end is genuinely happening. So in the old days, maybe you needed a lot of money, maybe you needed to buy some hardware, maybe you needed a range of skills that you didn't have. Whereas now, anybody can rent some space on Amazon's server, anybody can innovate in business model. So one of the supply-side drivers, to my mind, is, if you like, this creativity, entrepreneurship, and business model innovation. And similarly, lots of interesting things going on the demand side, but I shan't focus on those. You'll notice that I have some very busy slides. Partly, I don't have the polish of a large organization, but also partly, I've been dipping in and out of slide packs because there are quite a lot of interesting things going on. So, opportunities. Quite frankly, just about every industry you can think of is being transformed by this. Let's take a trivial example. It may be sensible to embed this lectern. Why? Because if you don't, at any given point in time, you have an important conference and you need to be sending people all over the campus trying to figure out where this lectern is. If it's cheap enough to do it and it makes enough sense, you embed the lectern. The minute it leaves this room, you know about it. So whether you look at retail, healthcare, sports and recreation, opportunities just about everywhere. Hardly any M2M presentation is complete without this Beecham research map. So let's move on. So how do you assess this opportunity? So you have all this massive spectrum of opportunities. Where do you put your money? So there have been lots of talk about, what's the revenue potential of automotive? What's the profit potential? What's the, as you look at these verticals, which one should you target first as operators? And there have been lots of discussion. I've been in about, maybe 10, 12 over the last several years, M2M, Internet of Things presentation. To me, let's go back a bit. To me, probably the most important way of looking at this is by stakeholder motivation. Who's going to do it? Who's going to pay for it and why? And some of the answers aren't necessarily what we might suspect. Let me give you an example. There may not be a compelling case for the consumer to pay for electric meters. Governments might not have the money to pay for electric meters. But somebody left of field maybe has an application that the consumer might respond to that may actually lead to the meters being paid for. Let's take another real example. The insurance industry is all over this stuff. Why? They believe they can become a lot more profitable. They believe they can write better policies. And in fact, it probably does make sense. They can say to me, actually, Mr. Joseph, we have to decline your claim for whiplash. In fact, the car behind didn't hit you. What happened is that you hit the car in front, and then the car behind hit you. They can actually, and in fact, we have had some instances where insurance companies have gotten involved. So they have an interest, possibly, in kitting out the cars because it becomes more efficient for them to sell policies. So the point I'd like to make here is that we needn't necessarily look to the usual suspects to have some of these things, to see how these take off. And the final point here in terms of the overall scheme of things is we've moved away from talking about killer applications to realizing that what we're talking about is possibly a very long tail of viable applications. Maybe it makes sense to address just this particular little niche because it's profitable enough to do so. Okay. There are a couple of things that aren't usually referred to in this that I'd like to talk about here. White space radio. Who here is up to speed on what white space radio is? Surely there must be a few hands going up here. Okay, right. Definitely. Okay. So what's happening now? One of the things is that the chips are so clever. You can do so much clever things with software that if you've got little bits and pieces of spectrum around where you used to do television, it's now possible to knit that together. And the proponents of it say that the actual bandwidth you have available is something like over 100 megahertz, which is actually better than Wi-Fi. The second thing about it is that the characteristics, where it is, allows you to penetrate cellars and in buildings and under cupboards, where you might want to place meters, which 2G, 3G don't necessarily address. So very interesting space. There's a company called Newell in the UK that's doing some research around this. Microsoft, BBC, a lot of interesting companies backing that. Cell broadcast. Again, when you're looking at maybe devices that aren't necessarily fantastically clever, maybe there's some things you need to do that fire and forget. There's some interesting guys like One-to-Many who are working on that. And some of that is obviously part of the architecture that we need to look at going forward. And finally, big data analytics. Obviously, no need to mention this because we've heard a lot about this. So yes, we have all these fantastic opportunities. So what are some of the challenges? Quite a few of these have already been mentioned today as well. The forecasting job that has been, excellent job that has been done, talks about the fact that this debt impact may actually have in terms of the development market overhaul. And of course, it's going to have an impact on M2M Internet of Things. One area which we sort of touched on but probably haven't done, and I think in probably enough justice, is this business about the policy framework around some of this stuff. This stuff is moving at such a rate that to my mind, we're not necessarily keeping up. In fact, we in many cases, we are reacting after the horse is bolted. This is a big one. Privacy, security, trust. The trust one is particularly important. I was surprised to hear so much discussion about mobile device management earlier. That's a subject which, as you can imagine, is very close to my heart. And one of the big hottest topics at the moment in that area is bring your own device. So somebody comes into the campus, they bring their iPad. Do you allow them to connect to the network? If you do, what are the implications? And some of what's happening is that it makes sense maybe to create a virtual environment in which you keep your corporate stuff safe, and they can do whatever they like on their side. But here's the issue. Would you, as an employee of corporate X, be necessarily trusting of the IT department to not necessarily look into your private space? So there are lots of issues in this area. And in particular, when you look at, if it's a person, if it's a mobile phone, usually you have some way of knowing when the thing was registered, knowing who it's associated with, and so on. When you start looking at devices, there may not be that loop where you can check who the device that's reporting or purporting to report is necessarily the one that you think it is. So lots of issues around that. And similarly, if I can sort of look at, back here. As you can see, I'm having challenges here with the initiative testing. Yeah, I go here. Okay. On this side, at an industry level, the issue of standardization has been mentioned, but let me put another twist on the issue of standardization. In the old days, Nortel competed with, Alcatel competed with, Ericsson competed with, but nevertheless, there was an understanding that it made sense to come together to form standards, to collaborate on standards to advance the industry. Rising tide lifts all boats. That, to my mind, is not necessarily true these days. There are people coming completely left of field, completely vertical stacks, and capturing and decimating markets. This means that the traditional proponents of standards aren't necessarily as aggressively pursuing as they'd like. That's one issue. The second issue is, quite frankly, this stuff is moving so fast that the standards just cannot keep up. So, Let me sum up on this side. On the standards side, the other issue relating to standards is this. We've been, by and large, talking about technical standards. What is a protocol for communicating a device? What's the architecture for managing all this big data stuff? We haven't necessarily been, and we've been largely looking at this M2M, Internet of Things bit, as separate from what's going on with the normal line of business of the enterprise. So to me, once you start linking these things real time, some of the enterprise frameworks, especially when you start going into specific verticals, become very relevant indeed. People like the Jericho Forum have done a lot of work around, identity. One of their big things was about deperimeterization. The idea that it's no longer possible for you to draw a nice fence around your organization and your interests because you're interacting with customers, with partners, and so on. And therefore, you have to go around architecting security in a slightly different way. This becomes even more relevant once you start looking at connected objects and worlds of connected objects. So what I'm getting at here is that as we go forward, we'll probably start looking at a lot less about the technology of things, and in fact, some people have already mentioned some of these intellectual property and so on, and looking at some of the, if you like, the wider societal impacts of this, rather than the GWIS aspects of the technology. So how might this evolution occur? Well, there'll be consolidation. It's already happening in droves. There are, that top bit here, is anybody familiar with what this is? We need some exercise here to, no? I can't quite see. I hear some, yes, absolutely, okay. So this is a learning thermostat from a group called Nest Labs, and it's sort of people who left Apple. So the idea is you just stick this thing on your wall, $250 by the way. You stick it on your wall, when you're cold, you turn it up, when you hot, you turn it down. And after it's there for a week or so, it starts learning your behavior. You don't necessarily need to do anything. They communicate with each other via Wi-Fi and so on. So one of the things that has yet to happen, and I'll explain why I refer to this particular one in a minute, is on the home front. We have all the bits and pieces there. We've had it for years. There have been several people attempting various bits, Pauline Carrier, X10, but for some reason it hasn't come together. Now, one of the ways in which it might well come together is if, in fact, somebody who is not necessarily one of the traditional players actually comes in and makes some sense of it. Here's an example. I can't imagine a scenario where Apple makes a kettle or a toaster and the Apple fans do not necessarily buy it. Another area that's probably not often spoken about here is how do you actually engage the ecosystem? Now, various players have been having different attempts at it. This particular thing here, I'm not sure if the university here is doing anything with this, but this happens to be a reference design from Intel. It has just about every bit of radio stack you can think of on it. And in this particular case, they were showing how it can be used in a home automation context. So the message from this particular slide is what we're looking at is building an ecosystem from the ground up in order to make this thing happen. At the personal level, I don't know if anybody here has an Android watch yet, but one of the spaces that I think we are likely to see the consumer actually voting with his or her feet is actually going out and buying these things either because they are running fans or whatever. Okay, here's another quiz. What is this? Sorry? Yes, okay. Excellent. That man gets the prize. We here are technologists, so by and large we talk about the technology and so on. There's a set of people, there's a website called Council, and these guys are very much into the societal impacts of this. And they believe that one of the true benefits of all this stuff, when the dust settles, once all these business models and so on, what we're talking about is transforming the way we live. And they cite this kind of thing as an example. So instead of going to the shop to buy a toy or whatever, you have your own 3G printer, your own three-dimensional printer. You buy the design from whomever, and you basically print what you need at home. So as you push the envelope forward in terms of Internet of Things, what people are talking about is basically transforming society fundamentally, the way in which we make things, the way in which we distribute things, the way in which we interact with things. And they cite these developments, which are gathering quite a lot of momentum at the moment, as an example. Another example here is this modular hardware that Ford is using, Boggs Labs. I give this too, but one of the interesting things, and I'm not sure if anybody here is studying this, Kickstarter. It turns out that there are an awful lot, an accelerating number of M2M Internet of Things related projects getting funded on Kickstarter these days. Lots of discussions about cloud. So just a word on this for a minute. One of our new members is a company called Paulcast. And this guy worked for Apple. He worked for, in fact, he was responsible for the scalable architecture at Amazon. His name is Hong Bui. And what he has effectively come up with is a scenario that allows the consumer to build his own private cloud. Now, why am I talking about it in this context? Because the problem that's being solved is by and large similar to the problem that needs to be solved for some parts of the ecosystem relating to the enterprise and also relating to this M2M Internet of Things. So in this particular instance, you install this stuff on your PC at home or on campus. You don't necessarily need to put your information into the cloud. And what you can do is you can literally pick out any device and gain access to your content in real time. And they've done some very, very clever things. So Samsung and various other people like that are interested. But suffice it to say that cloud is very much an important part of this architecture. Let me give you another example. I went on a mission, a UK Trade and Industry mission to China. I think it was towards the middle of 2010, something like that. And, all people were very anxious to engage with the Chinese, what can we do for you? So somebody asked the question, what can we do? What can we help you? And they said, well, actually, I think we were expecting answers like, collaborate on R&D or whatever. They say, well, actually, the way we look at it is, the value chains are not complete. We see cloud as part of the picture. So, in other words, we had been, unfortunately, very guilty of looking at this in a very narrow way and what's happening over the next 2-3 years. They were thinking 15, 20 years ahead. And see cloud as part of this. I know I appear to be jumping in and out, but part of what I'm doing is to try to touch on the various themes that have been talked about earlier today. I think a point that was made in the last panel is maybe that we need to take a step back sometimes and not be too prescriptive in terms of our views of how some of these things may actually evolve over time. Now, here are a couple of examples. I use this quite a lot. The fact is, our thinking of the problem scope or the opportunity scope changes over time. Now, here are a couple of concrete examples. In the case of managing devices, the issue only came to the fore when 3G phones started rolling out in Japan. You had a population of phones out there, and the question is, what do you do with them if you have a bug? Recalling hundreds of thousands of phones becomes a main problem. But as operators invested in this thing, then it's about cost control, efficiency, customer care. And then finally, if you've got all this technology, why don't you use it to make some money and alter your proposition? Something similar happens in the security space. So if you look at networks in the old days, the only security concern was how do you stop people from making phone calls they shouldn't. Now roll forward to 2010, 2012, and you have all kinds of issues. Protecting the user. It's me. I've subscribed to that service. It's my iPad. But do you know at this instance in time, it's me actually accessing that dodgy service or my 10-year-old daughter? And how do you as an operator manage that? Now, it might sound a little far-fetched, but we had a case in the UK where teenagers were texting each other and then went and committed suicide, some of them. So the government got BT, Vodafone, Zilot into a room to try and bash heads together. How dare you allow people to use your phones to text and then go commit suicide? So as an operator, and by the way, how many operators do we have in the room? None? Oh, one. So as an operator, you'd find that there are all manners of issues suddenly appearing on your table as a result of the way in which people may or may not use or abuse some of these technologies. So moving on. So I've talked a bit about the opportunities. I've talked a bit about what some of the threats are. So who might win in some of this? Well, the good news, Mr. Operator, is we believe that you do have a role to play. We believe that some of that market, a good part of the market, is yours to lose, basically. And the reason is because of some of what we're talking about involves licensed spectrum, and you're still kingmaker in that. You've paid for your spectrum. However, you're not necessarily going to have it all your own way, because if this thing if this white space technology takes off, there are plenty of people who say, well, it's quite amusing. We started hosting a series of workshops, and one of the people there was Fred Harrison, the chairman of Open Mobile Alliance, and he's head of advanced technology at O2. And it was he who had to remind the audience that televisions don't move around very much. So in reality, as far as home electronics is concerned, consumer electronics, Wi-Fi is probably very, very much good enough for any of these things we are talking about. We're beginning to see the IT gatekeepers really coming to the fore. And I highlight China. Now, it was quite interesting to listen earlier to issues in India versus the rest of the world. I happen to believe that India probably has some similar potential to China, simply because at the end of the day, we are talking about delivering value to end consumers, and consumers willing to pay for value. That, to me, India has probably as much as China does. But China is important for a number of reasons. One is they are very serious about this stuff and have written it literally into the current 5-year plan. And are definitely thinking very, very far ahead in terms of the way they actually go around architecting some of these things. So the first event we had in 2010, we had China Mobile explaining what they were doing in terms of the airport, monitoring pollution, all kinds of things. This time round, the main takeaway for me in April was that having looked at all of this stuff, they're concluding that they need to build a separate network. So rather than look at getting extra value out of the infrastructure they've already put in place, they're actually talking about building separate networks for M2M. So I'll just go, and of course some of these numbers in terms of the size of the consumer, the middle class, growing middle class, the size of the market. And of course China has as much a problem as the rest of us around things like, if you take healthcare, I've seen a figure of something like 250 million people over 65. A growing number of people, shrinking budgets to look after them. And that's why, if you ask the people who are spending money in this space which sectors they'll bet on, a number of them say healthcare, but they see it as quite a thorny issue. So I now want to just look at the issue of device management in the context of some of what we've been talking about. So a couple of things. Device management is necessary. If you have any service, mobile advertising, games, whatever, if your service happens to use a device, you ought to be interested in this stuff because it's a fundamental layer that needs to sit below whatever it is you're doing as a business on the device. The second aspect of device management in this context, which, as I said, it happens to be one of the thorniest problems in M2M and Internet of Things, is that the devices and classes of devices are becoming the window into which you actually view the entire opportunity space and the entire management of all of these technologies. So if you like, there are interweaved layers relating to management of devices in all of this. So a little bit about a device management forum. Interestingly, the presence people see of us is basically the portal. In reality, we started that only to help members keep up to date with the news. Suffice it to say that these days a lot of people are very interested because we've been running interviews and so on. So I'd very much like to interview the thought leaders amongst you here. We're also interested in partnerships because people like us to do various studies of the market, segment the market, and some of the good work you've been doing here. We'd like to work with you on that. We also get calls for people to speak at international events and so on. So those of you who are interested in that, talk to us and we'll be happy to help facilitate you getting the knowledge you have onto a wider stage. M2M Insights. This is very much a beta project, but the idea is to focus in a little bit more tightly on the specific opportunities in these segments. And one of the things we have the ability to do, and you may be, a number of you here may be interested in this, is say, for example, somebody believed that, and I use this example with Telenor, and it turns out that they did have a case. If you happen to believe that bird watching is an important segment for M2M Internet of Things, we have the ability to work with you to create a new channel for that and so on. And as it turns out, people have that kind of need. What we've been doing these events like in China. We started a series of workshops, evening workshops, and I've just started to basically experiment with meetups. So maybe we can look at having a meetup on campus sometime in the not too distant future. We have been doing the M2M thing in China. We'd very much like to do one in India, and we have been discussing that with a number of partners. Here's a concrete example of something we did. I don't know if anybody recognizes this man. He is Professor Candy, who's global CTO of Hutchison 3. What we did in that particular occasion was to look at, bring together stakeholders in the service provider space, such as him, Fred Harrison, as I mentioned earlier, people within the enterprise space, and people within the traditional M2M Internet of Things, to look specifically at the issue of management and security. What is converging? What do we really need to look at? And there was some very interesting outcome from that session. If anybody wants to know about, we can speak offline. Very busy slide here on the conclusions, but the bottom line is this. There are a number of key drivers. It is beyond hype. We're talking about genuine creation of new mousetraps, new business, and that's supported both by new technology and by new processes and by new possibilities enabled by cloud services. The operators have a role to play. The question would be, to what extent do they step up to the plate and actually take that, or to what extent do they allow others to steal a march? And the reason they have that role is because of licensed spectrum. At the end of the day, this is a scale game, right? We're talking about billions of devices, billions of sensors, so economies of scale do play. And it's interesting, I used to go around saying, wait till Huawei, wait till Ericsson enters. And just before I left the UK, Huawei made an announcement about a big M2M initiative in Europe. So that's not to say that the small guys do not necessarily have a chance. What it means is that you do need to be a lot smarter, a lot nimbler, and thank goodness there is a possibility to do that. So that's about as much from me at this point. And I'd very much like to welcome some questions. Device management, M2M, Internet of Things. Happy to answer. Okay. You'd have to catch me offline. Oh, sorry. Sure.
Hi, my name is Akbar, and I work for Vodafone. Out of the different industry segments that you mentioned, which industry segment you think will adopt M2M and ITU faster than the other? This is question one. Second question which I have for you is, as you mentioned, business models will evolve. So have you seen? Can you give any example where business model is in a fairly mature shape, and you can share the details with us?
Okay. The answer to the first question about segments is that it depends market by market. In Europe, we have some initiatives around smart meters, so Italy, for example. It also depends on the attitude of governments. Brazil had made some announcements about ensuring that every car sold beyond a certain date is fitted so that it can be tracked and traced. So there are opportunities in all of these segments. The question is, how do these opportunities get primed, and who actually stands to gain? I know, for example, at Vodafone, you guys are doing a lot of exciting things in the automotive space with BMW and so on in Germany. Healthcare, I think, is probably going to be one of the biggest. If we look, 5 years on, 7 years on, 10 years on, I think healthcare would be pretty massive. In the nearer term, I believe there's some opportunities around consumer electronics where the consumer is willing to pay for certain things.
So you mentioned that there are opportunities across the industry segments. Each industry segment is structured differently. Like pharma has a different structure, retail has its own challenges. So if you look at the structure of the different industry segment, which one is more suitable or which one is more adaptable?
Okay. Now, this is interesting because some markets, by their very nature, are multi-domestic. And some markets probably are more amenable to the sort of footprint that, say, Vodafone has, for example. And to be honest, I think the jury is still out on that. If you look at health, health is clearly something that's very much multi-domestic. If you look at something like automotive, then obviously you don't want things to change from the minute you drive from Belgium to France. So I know that Vodafone has invested a lot in that. Meter reading, energy management, lots of potential, likely to need government support. Things that are involving the consumer have a greater propensity to have international and possibly global appeal. So if I were somebody looking at building something that had mass consumer appeal, like, I don't know, heart rate monitoring or something that integrates with a person, I would be looking at global markets. And I think there are some substantial opportunities there in relation to the consumer space. I think it's a very complicated issue, and you need to sort of peel the layers instance by instance. I'm not sure whether I did any justice to the question.
Ideas, I think what you are saying is, the industry segments, for example, you mentioned the meter reading and all, the ones which are likely to get support from the regulatory bodies and the government, those are likely to move faster than others. And where there are regulatory complications like the consumer segment and all, I think those things will go slower, and they will wait for others to mature.
Yes, with one provisor, and that is, there are instances where, if you look, for example, at the Samsung Smart TV, and if you look at what they're doing in terms of integration with the devices and so on, it's entirely conceivable that 3 or 4 years from now, either Samsung or Apple might have solved and cornered the consumer electronics space, so that when you buy your next washing machine, you make sure that it's got a Samsung interface or whatever. So I think there's a potential for some large players with either muscle or the brand equity to actually go out and do so and prime some markets.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir, for such a thought-provoking session. I request you to take your seat on the stage. Now, I would like to request my colleague to present sir with a memento as a token of our gratitude and appreciation.
Thank you, sir. May I now request you to kindly take your seat amongst the audience. We now move for another networking break and would be back for the final session of Communicate 12, Day 1 of International Telecom Seminar. I would request the student representatives to accompany the guests for refreshments from the door on my right. We will resume our final session in some time. Student and student delegates are requested to remain seated for a few more minutes.